Who's green and magical and has changed the world?
Kermit the Frog.
Nope, it's Swamp Thing, and it's time to talk about the top 5 Swamp Thing stories you should read on this week's Geek History Lesson. Hello and welcome to Geek History Lesson. I am Jason Leafy Greens Inman.
I'm Ashley Victoria Robinson. Welcome to your Mind University, because you have stumbled onto the podcast where we take one character, construct, or green from popular culture and teach you everything you need to know about them in about an hour, except this week.
Yes, this week's going to be a little bit different because, as we know, there's a show out there called Swamp Thing that's been playing on the DC Universe app, and now it's leaving. I guess it's canceled. Haven't watched any of it. It's full, so there will be no spoilers for that television show. I have not seen a single episode of it. I've been very busy. But it's still, I think, a good enough reason to talk about Swamp Thing.
Let's do it.
Yeah. So, Ashley, this is a normal top 5 where I will be giving you my top 5 Swamp Thing stories that I think you should read. But this top 5 is going to be a little bit different. Why is that?
Well, I've read no Swamp Thing stories.
Not a single one?
No.
I bet you've read a comic book Swamp Thing in it. He's in Crisis on Infinite Earths.
Yeah, but he's never been like an important part.
But you've never actually read a comic book that was titled Swamp Thing.
That's true.
What about Swamp
Nugget?
No, let's not even go down that road. So this will be different because I will be giving my top 5. And then by the end of the podcast, it's a hope that I will convince Ashley to maybe read one of these stories. Very similar to our top 5 Iron Fist stories.
Yes, I was just going to bring that up. Thank you.
Yes. So before we get to the list, I want to do a brief recap on the 10-cent origin of Swamp Thing. So Ashley, what is the 10-cent origin?
The 10-cent origin is the first part of the podcast where Professor Jason is going to lay down all the creators and power sets and all that good stuff in case you go to a DC Universe themed cocktail party and someone's like, what's up with that Swamp Thing guy?
Now, Swamp Thing, of course, is a DC Comics character that was created by writer Len Wein and artist Bernie Wrightson. Now, fun fact, the Swamp Thing has had several humanoid and monstrous incarnations in various different storylines, but the one I'm going to talk about is the Swamp Thing first appears in House of Secrets number 92, and his human identity of Alec Holland first appears in Swamp Thing number 1 of November 1972.
Cool.
He is a swamp monster / elemental. His team affiliations have been the Justice League Dark, the Justice League, the Parliament of Trees. His partnerships have been with Animal Man and John Constantine. And his abilities are he has superhuman strength, durability, plant manipulation, plant psychology, elasticity, and basically anything the writers want to say that a plant can do, which is a lot.
Yeah, the same thing happens with magic wielders.
Yes. It's basically whatever they want him to do whenever he can do it. Now, before we get to the list, I want to thank our sponsor, which is my book.
Hey, look at that.
I wrote a book called Super Soldiers, a salute to the comic book heroes and villains that have served our country. And I'm very proud of this book. And this book examines comic book characters that have served in the military. Now, I know what you're saying. You're saying right now, hey, I don't like comic book characters. My first thing to you is, why you listen to this podcast. My second thing is you might be like, I don't care about the military. And, well, let me tell you a little bit about this. So one of the characters I talk about in the book, Ashley, is Hal Jordan. And I talk about how his military service impacts his character. And I specifically break down for Hal Jordan. I break down how his father served and how that impacted his story and why Hal joined the military. Because initially, his mother didn't want Hal to join the military because his father died in the service. And that becomes a big struggling point, a big, I would say, flashpoint in Hal Jordan's career. So if that sounds interesting to you, me digging deep into that Hal Jordan psychology, then please pick up Super Soldiers, my book, on Amazon and Barnes & Noble and everywhere where books are sold. If you enjoy Geek History Lesson, I'm pretty certain you'll like it. Some other professional writers have liked it as well, including Joshua Hale Fialkoff, who is the writer of The Bunker, Tumor, I, Vampire, and The Ultimates, who says, Inman brings more insight to the superhero genre than any other writer, fan, or critic ever before. A truly thoughtful look at the tradition of heroism in the face of war. And I just want to say thank you. I've been getting a lot of pictures online to all the people that have purchased the book. They're awesome. I love people seeing people's pictures of their book and holding them. So if you have purchased Super Soldiers, please send me a picture of your book. I love seeing them. And also, please consider leaving me a review on Amazon. Here's the reason why I always bring that up. 50 reviews on Amazon are the magical number on Amazon to make the search algorithm push your book. And here's the fun fact. You don't even have bought the book on Amazon to leave a review. Now, thousands of people right now listen to GHL, and I'm going to ask you all right now to go review Super Soldiers on Amazon. Please, I need your help to get the book over 50 reviews so that I can have enough funds to make GHL intern Cat Brago's college account solvent.
That's right.
So we need to send him to college. So thank you so much. I hope you enjoy my book, Super Soldiers. If you enjoyed the podcast, you enjoy this podcast and this episode, I think you'll enjoy it. So thank you.
Yeah.
All right. Start off with the list.
Number 5.
Yeah, you're going to say all the numbers.
Number 5.
So this is very one-sided, but it's okay. It's all good.
It's going to be great.
I'm going to convince you to enjoy the green, to deep dive into the muck. Number 5, actually, is the most recent of the Swamp Thing stories. Mm-hmm. It is a singular issue called the Swamp Thing Winter Special, written by Tom King, Len Wein, and drawn by Jason Fabok and Kelly Jones. Now, this was released shortly after the deaths of both Bernie Wrightson and Swamp Thing creator Len Wein. Now, the issue starts off with Tom King and Jason Fabok's singular story about Swamp Thing walking through this unrelenting winter storm and protecting this young boy at the center of the storm. And it's called The Talk of the Saints. And it's self-contained. You don't need to know anything about Swamp Thing. And I'm not going to spoil what happens at the end of this because I want you to experience it fully. But basically, it is Swamp Thing driving through a forest for months and months and months, protecting this little boy that is smaller than 10. And there's a twist for what is happening. Why is Swamp Thing protecting this little boy? Where are they going? What are they doing? But the interesting thing that I think about Swamp Thing is that Swamp Thing is an eternal character. No, he's not part of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Eternals.
What?
What I mean is that he's basically immortal. You can't kill him. Mm-hmm. So you get to see some of that portrayed through an especially poetic way. And that's why I think that this little Tom King story has posted in. But that's not all of why I put this on the list. In this issue is the final written work of Len Wein. Mm-hmm. Now, here's the thing. It is posted in this issue, drawn by longtime collaborator Kelly Jones, and it's not lettered. Mm-hmm. But they do publish the script, the final script that Len Wein ever wrote, and that makes the back of this issue. Now, this has been collected in a bigger version that has other Swamp Thing stories. This was a one-shot. It was an 80-page giant.
Because this issue was published posthumously. Len Wein had passed when this was put out in the world.
And they basically decided to publish this issue because of the Len Wein death. I think the Tom King story was going to go somewhere else, and then because they had this issue by Len Wein and they had this issue of Tom King, they decided to put it out together as one. And I could be wrong. I want to say Tom King just won the Eisner for this or something. I think recently, this Swamp King story. So that is the reason why it's my number 5. I know I'm very vague on this. I know I can't really say a lot about it, but I can't really give you the twist of this without completely ruining your enjoyment of this. Now, actually, I want to ask you, how important is Len Wein to comics in case anyone doesn't know? I think we've talked about him a lot on this podcast, but let's just throw this out there.
Yeah, Len Wein is amazing.
And the creator of Swamp Thing.
Yes. Len Wein, first of all, created everyone that you love. If you love the X-Men, boy, do you love Len Wein. Len Wein created everyone that I love in the X-Men.
Name off some of them.
Nightcrawler.
Yep.
Wolverine.
Yep.
Kitty Pryde.
I don't think he created Kitty Pryde. I think that's a Chris Claremont.
I thought he created Kitty Pryde.
He created Colossus.
So he created a lot of the X characters that became very popular in the 80s, a la giant-sized X-Men.
I'm not certain about that. I don't know if he created Kitty Pryde.
That's okay. But Len Wein created all these characters that we love. He worked on maybe...
He did not.
Okay.
Chris Claremont.
Every character worth a damn in comics for a very, very long time. He was also known for just being a very lovely person. When he passed, a lot of people spoke about how kind he was and how generous he was with his time. Jason had a chance to interview him.
Did you ever meet him?
Yes.
You met him briefly.
He shopped at Earth 2, where I used to work. And he always came in wearing a different T-shirt of a character that he had created, which I thought was very, very funny. Very beloved. And can I tell you a secret?
Okay.
I've read this issue.
You have?
Yes.
So you lied.
I forgot.
You're a liar.
I forgot.
You're a liar.
Because DC Comics...
Actually, I'm calling you out. You're a liar.
DC Comics sent us this issue. We had a physical copy.
You said you'd never read a Swamp Thing story.
I forgot. But the minute you brought this up, I was like, I read that.
By the way, Len Wein also created Storm.
Yeah, because he wrote that Giant Size X-Men.
He wrote Giant Size X-Men. Yes, he did.
Sorry, I always think of Kitty Pryde as being an addition to that. It's fine, whatever. The Kitty Pryde lesson.
No, Kitty Pryde is not part of that issue.
But yeah, Len Wein is a legend, and not only because he was a creative force to be reckoned with, but because he was a kind person.
He's a super awesome person. I got to interview him 2 or 3 times, and he was lovely.
Didn't you ask him about what it was like to have created everyone that everyone loves?
The question I asked him was that basically since he has created and written almost every comic book title that you could ever imagine. I mean, he has runs on almost every Avengers, Justice League, Batman. I mean, he created Lucius Fox.
Yeah.
So I think my question to him was, is there a character that you have not worked on that you would love to work on? And he said the Doctor from Doctor Who is who he said.
I'll tell you what, listeners, on Saturday and Sunday is when I try to post anything that we reference in the episode. I will find Jason's interview with Len Wein, and I will post that.
It's on my YouTube channel.
To our accounts, yeah.
Yeah.
So that you can all check that out. It's a great interview.
Yes, from my pre-DC days.
Yeah.
All right, we're going to the next one on the list.
All right, the number 4.
All right, actually, you may have know 2 comic book writers.
Personally?
No.
Okay.
But you know these gentlemen.
Okay.
They are gentlemen from the United Kingdom. Uh-huh. One, I think they are both Scottish, yes. Little pair called Grant Morrison and Mark Millar. Uh-huh. You know these guys. And what a lot of people don't realize is that they teamed up for a majority of the 90s. Like, the only reason why Mark Millar works in comic books is because of Grant Morrison. Because they used to be really good friends, and then now I don't think they are really good friends anymore. But Mark Millar has gone on to create The Kingsman, and Grant Morrison has gone on to make Happy and all kinds of crazy stuff like
God.
that. Well, they did a Swamp Thing run. And their Swamp Thing run is my number 4.
I didn't know that.
Yes. It's called Swamp Thing, The Root of Evil. That is sort of the collection that collects all of it. They did 11 issues with an artist that we know named Phil Hester.
Hey, we talk about Phil Hester a lot recently.
Now, this happened in the 90s, in 1994. And this was, this basically re-examined kind of the humanity of Swamp Thing and kind of the civilian identity of Dr. Alec Holland. Now, the start of this Swamp Thing run is that Alec Holland wakes up in South America, far away from the Louisiana bayou that he calls home, and he starts to believe that all the adventures of Swamp Thing and all the things that happened to Swamp Thing and all the, things that he fought in the rot were hallucinations and that they were fake.
So we got a little occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge.
Yes. This is a little bit of a trope that you've seen in lots and lots of science fiction stories. But the interesting thing about this is that it really poses the idea of identity and the idea of Swamp Thing is so ever present in comic books, and Alec Holland is very human, whereas Swamp Thing is not human, and Swamp Thing is green, and he can transform into mushrooms and all kinds of crap like that. And it's the idea of are they separate? Are they together? What does this mean? And to me, it kind of comes down as the perfect Vertigo storyline for Swamp Thing. And again, hallucinations. Again, there's a very famous Alan Moore Swamp Thing storyline where Swamp Thing eats mushrooms and, has some loving time.
Opens up his third eye.
Well, or his like 17th eye. Actually, Swamp Thing has lots of eyes. But again, Grant Morrison, Mark Millar are a perfect team, and their run on Swamp Thing, I think, is a perfect thing, and that's the reason why it is my number 4, and also that's the reason why I love Grant Morrison. Now, Ashley, I want to ask you this question. We see a lot of storylines where characters question their identities. There's every genre television show has the episode. Buffy the Vampire Slayer did it. Smallville did it, where the character wakes up from like, a long nap, or in an insane asylum,
Stargate did
or in a hospital, and they're told that their life, their adventures are fake.
Deep Space Nine did it.
Yeah, every genre television show has done this. Do you think it's important to make your character question their identity in that way? Now, I will say Swamp Thing does that a lot.
Do I think it's important? No.
Well, okay, I'm going to back you out of the trope because I think all you're... Okay, I want to... Hold up. Put a pause right on this.
Can I finish my statement?
No. I'm not going to let you finish. Because I don't want this to become... Because we've talked about that trope before, and that's not what I want this answer to be.
I understand that.
Okay. What I want to talk about is it important to make a character question his identity, like the known of his world? Because again, like I said, Swamp Thing stories are kind of all about that. They're all about like, am I Swamp Thing or am I Alec Holland?
I was going to ask you that just because I'm less familiar with Swamp Thing.
Because we've already ruled that trope is kind of played out.
So still, no. Do I think it's important for them to doubt their identity? In the broad strokes of all characters in genre, no, absolutely not. In terms of the trope in particular, I don't even hate this trope. Tropes are not all bad, but tropes are tropes for a reason. But I think when this trope is done really well, or when it's presented with an interesting twist, like in Deep Space Nine, I think it can be very fascinating. It can be very introspective, and you can learn a lot about your characters. Now, in terms of Swamp Thing, again, with my limited knowledge of what a Swamp Thing story looks like, I think this is probably a sweet spot because he is not... I don't think he's like two different people in the way that Negative Man is like two different beings cohabitating, but it's two identities that are struggling for dominance or cohabitation, right? I'm not projecting too much.
It's the idea that their worlds are so different. Like one is very human and one is very mystical and insanity. Yeah.
So I see how for Swamp Thing that would be, and this is no pun intended, very fertile ground, how that would be worth exploring. But I don't think just because you have a genre character, I don't think they have to have a quote unquote identity crisis. I think that's become tropey in its own way. Thanks, Peter Parker. I would actually like more characters that were confident in what they did and not having as much self-doubt. Now, sometimes that goes too far, right? And we get like super dick Batman. But I think for a Swamp Thing story, I think that's probably a ground that you want to dwell in. And I would imagine when Abby is featured.
Abby Arcane.
Yes.
Swamp Thing's love, just for anybody that doesn't know.
Yes, she has white hair. That's probably some...
She's one of the lead characters of the DC Universe show as well, I think.
Well, I've not seen it, so I think you're correct, though. But I would imagine that particularly in dealing with Abby, that would be a question, because Abby's obviously human, used to dealing with a human compatriot. And what does that look like when she's dealing with a less than human compatriot? But if you think that this is worthy of being on your top 5 list, then it's probably done well, and it probably is worth telling. And I mean, Grant Morrison and Mark Millar are great.
Look, I'm going to say this as well. Part of the reason why I'm not giving you much of these stories is that they are so metaphorical, and also they're all built around like big twists. And some of these I don't want to give the twists away, and some of these I do. So that's the reason why I'm being like quite vague with some of these right now.
Well, and Swamp Thing is one of those characters too who often falls into magical, mystical realms, because he hangs out with Constantine and Zatara and the Justice League, and I know that.
Well, not really the Justice League, but yes.
Sorry, the Justice League Dark.
There you go.
He's worked with the Justice League Dark. He was in the movie. So I know that sometimes it's also difficult to try and explain that because it's mystical and wild and wacky. All right. Your number 3 is upon us.
My number 3 is a singular issue and an entire run. I'm going to focus on a singular issue, but I'm going to kind of like package the whole run under this, even though we are going to talk about another issue from this run in some other point in this list.
Okay.
You can probably figure out where there's only 2 other spots left. Okay, so my number 3 is The Anatomy Lesson. Saga of the Swamp Thing, number 21 by Alan Moore and Stephen Bissett. Now, I'm going to kind of couch all of Alan Moore's run underneath this number 3.
Okay.
Okay? Because when you start this run, you're going to just want to read all of it. Now, this one I am going to give you the twist because I think the twist is the hook that makes you read this run.
Okay.
Now, in 1984, Ashley, Saga of the Swamp Thing. Swamp Thing's been around since 1974. He's a monster guy, shows up in a swamp, finds some weird people, attacks some people. Magic abounds.
Sure.
That's Swamp Thing for about 10 years. And that was what Saga of the Swamp Thing was. Until issue 21, when a young, insane wizard from another dimension named Alan Moore. Hello, I'm Alan Moore. I'm here. So these guys said I should take over Swamp Thing.
Didn't you just quit comics?
What? Yes. And F off Damon Lindelof.
Yeah, really.
And F off Watchmen HBO. And F off the world.
All right, tell me about Swamp Thing, Alan Moore.
So Swamp Thing was this plant creature, and I decided that I could not write a swamp creature. I needed to have more pathos. So I made some chaos magic deals with the god Baphomet, and he gave me the storyline.
You know, I want to ask
this
you
podcast.
if that's a joke, but I believe that is serious.
Alan Moore is a crazy wizard, but he has some great stories, and including one of them is this. So The Anatomy Lesson is Alan Moore's first at bat for Swamp Thing's first issue. Okay, and like I said, Swamp Thing is just this monster guy. Up until this point, just a monster guy. Just shows up, hey, mystical stuff, oh, cool. Alan Moore turns that all on its head, and I'm going to tell you how.
Okay.
So, this is a densely written issue, and it is a kind of skin-crawling opening issue. So, basically, in this issue, the Floronic Man, Jason Woodrue, who, by the way, has already made an appearance in live action in the DC Comics epic Batman and Robin, played by the man who played Lionel Luthor in Smallville. Yes, Jason Woodrue is the man who poisons Poison Ivy in Batman and Robin. But don't let that taint.
Glover? John Glover?
There you go, John Glover. Thank you. I couldn't remember his name. I kept wanting to say Jason Glover, and I knew that wasn't right. But anyways, the Floronic Man is the main antagonist for this issue.
Okay.
So he captures the Swamp Thing. Okay?
Sure.
And he's like, you know what? I'm going to dissect the Swamp Thing. Hence the title of the issue.
Great title.
The Anatomy Lesson. And as the Floronic Man starts to dissect Swamp Thing, he learns a secret about Swamp Thing. Now, Ashley, before I get into this and give you the twist, I want you to, just in basic terms, do you know Swamp Thing's origin? Let's just in base terms, do you know what it is? Okay, it's pretty simple. Alec Holland is a scientist. He has a lab in the swamp. He gets doused by a bunch of chemicals, and as he's
turned into the Flash.
No, yeah, that's very similar. But as he's going, my face, he runs out into the swamp muck, and the swamp muck and the chemicals turn him into the Swamp Thing.
Okay,
that's his basic origin.
Okay, sure. Okay? Yep.
Okay,
that's truly no dumber than anything else.
When the Floronic Man cuts open the Swamp Thing, he finds out that the Swamp Thing is not human.
Dun, 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 dun.
He reveals that when Alec's body was doused with Alec's formula, the biorestorative formula that was a bunch of chemicals, and came in contact with the swamp, the chemicals reacted with the microorganisms in the environment and produced a unique yet distinctly separate organism. The organism absorbed the memories and personality of Alec Holland, and in fact, this plant creature believed that it was Alec Holland. And the anatomy lesson is to learn that this Swamp Thing is not Alec Holland and was never human. So Alan Moore's run gets defined by getting to set up the character on his own terms by having it be this plant creature who thinks it's human but learns it's not.
Interesting.
And in this issue, the Swamp Thing destroys the lab and kills Jason Woodrue because, like, its identity is... Again, I said a lot of Swamp Thing stories are about identity. Mm-hmm. And this leads Alan Moore to basically do whatever he wants on the character, creating one of the greatest runs of all time, basically birthing the... this title is kind of what births Vertigo in the saga of the Swamp Thing. So that's the twist.
Interesting.
This Swamp Thing is not Alec Holland. Now, other versions of Alec Holland are Swamp Thing. But so we're going to talk about Alan another time on this list. But I would couch all of the runs, specifically the anatomy lesson, as number 3.
Can I ask you, as the person who has read Swamp Thing?
Yep.
Do you prefer it when Swamp Thing is a mutated version of Alec Holland, or do you like this idea better?
Ooh. Okay. I will say this. There are good stories on both sides.
Great.
There are good stories where Swamp Thing is Alec Holland, and there are good stories. In fact, our number 2 is going to be an Alec Holland Swamp Thing story.
Cool.
I kind of prefer him as the plant.
Okay.
I kind of prefer it when he's not Alec Holland. But I understand.
So, like, his body gets decimated or whatever. Like,
what?
Well, if this plant,
I guess I don't understand you. I'm sorry.
This plant creature, I don't think I'm articulating myself right. If this plant creature has absorbed Alec Holland's memories, where is the human body?
Oh, I don't want to give that away.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yes,
that's fine. That's fine.
I don't want to give that away.
Okay, but it is addressed. It's not just like, I don't know, it's somewhere.
It is.
Okay. That's fine. You don't have to tell me.
Well, there's also been several versions of this. In some versions, Alec Holland is just fine. In some versions,
really?
In some versions, Alec Holland dies.
Okay.
In some versions, Alec Holland's turned into something else.
Cool.
Vertigo's, when Swamp Thing becomes Vertigo, they kind of throw all continuity out the window.
Yes, and Constantine does that a little bit too.
And so I kind of think they leave it up to do you want it to be Alec Holland, or do you want it to be the plant creature, or do you want it to be Alec Holland? And it's not, in fact, actually until the New 52 that they concretely put a thing on it.
Well, that's also one of the joys of maybe, I don't want to say less, because that makes it sound like people don't care, but less editorial oversight and meddling. Is there's often more room for creativity when you're not on Batman.
I will say, in the Alan Moore run, in the Saga of the Swamp Thing run, which I highly recommend reading, the Alec Holland thing is a thing I don't want to give away.
Okay, that's totally fine.
Okay. But this leads us, speaking of the New 52, into my number 2.
In the New 52.
Which is a storyline called Rot World.
Oh, I know what this trade looks like.
Which is Swamp Thing number 13 to 18, Animal Man number 13 to 18. I would also couch all of Scott Snyder's Swamp Thing run into this. Ashley, before we start, let's talk about the New 52. What is the New 52?
So in 2011, DC was like, you know what? We liked Crisis on Infinite Earths. You know what we're going to do? Pared down continuity, except everything that Jeff Johns is writing. So Barry Allen runs back in time because he misses his mom, resets the universe. Everyone's only been a superhero for 5 years, except the characters that Jeff Johns is writing, and they get more lines on their costumes.
Yes, and as part of this relaunch, they relaunch a Swamp Thing book. And here's the thing. Now, before the New 52, there was this storyline called Brightest Day. And in this storyline, it kind of resurrected a bunch of dead characters, including the human Alec Holland.
Interesting.
This Swamp Thing run is Alec Holland post the Alan Moore. He's alive. He is human. And he knows about the plant creature that thought was him. That was Swamp Thing for like 20 years. Now, that Swamp Thing is dead.
Okay.
Now, this Alec Holland has to decide, does he become Swamp Thing again? Because like all these elements from the green are coming to him, and they're like, you're our plant Jesus. Yeah. You're supposed to be our Messiah. Like, the only reason like the plant creature, we accepted a plant creature that wasn't you, was because like he took up the job. And they kind of make this idea that Alec Holland didn't want to be the plant creature. And so, as you can tell, because the thing is called Swamp Thing, this is Alec Holland deciding to become Swamp Thing and accepting it and becoming the War King. Now, there's also a little bit This deals with the man becoming the monster again. And it deals with sort of some kind of Blackest Night type issues where it leans into, these are Alan Moore creations, but it leans into them hardcore that all the plant stuff on the world is kind of echoed by this spirit world called the Green.
Yeah.
All the animal stuff, the meat in the world is anchored by the Red.
Yeah.
And their avatar is Buddy Baker Animal Man. And then all the stuff that is dead is anchored by the Rot. Now, this is full-on horror, and it like proceeds into this giant battle to where the Red, the Rot, and the Green all fight. And of course, over the course of the storyline, the Animal Man run and the Swamp Thing run combine, and they team up, of course, against the Rot. It's really good. It's one of the better Swamp Thing runs. It's Swamp Thing in the modern DC universe, which is really great. The Animal run that complements this run is great. This is collected in a hardcover run that's like Swamp Thing by Scott Snyder and Yannick Paquette. I like to describe this as Avengers Endgame for Swamp Thing. He connects to everything. He has a giant battle, and it's really interesting. I remember when it started, I did not think I was going to love it, and I loved it. And if you like this storyline and you want to read more, I highly recommend the Animal run that complements this, the New 52 Animal Man run that is written by Jeff Lemire.
Another Jason Inman favorite.
It's amazing. But this is the second best Swamp Thing storyline of all time. Actually, I want to ask you a question. Because for a long time, Swamp Thing did not connect to the DC universe. Do you like Swamp Thing in the DC superhero universe, or do you like Swamp Thing by himself? It's kind of the Constantine argument, too.
I am sort of the opinion that the Vertigo characters should operate on the fringes of the DC universe.
Okay, so connect, but not that often.
Yes, because I do like Constantine connecting with certain characters, but I don't like them on a Justice League team.
Oh, so you don't like Swamp Thing on like Justice League Dark? Which he is currently.
Justice League Dark, I guess, is maybe the exception because they're supposed to be weirdos, but like I don't like when Constantine like shows up on the Justice League, or like that Batman can call him and be like, "John, come and help me out. Yeah. Alec, come and help." Like I have weird feel like I'm trying to eat my cake and have it too and be like, yes, but no, or yes, but with restrictions.
You want to hear my argument?
Sure.
I think Swamp Thing should. I think John Constantine should not.
I want him and Zatanna.
Now, the only exception is that I will allow you to have Constantine in your Swamp Thing book. But Hellblazer, you're on your own. John should be separate. I feel John is like the Punisher. Like he should be in his own corner doing his dark, weird stuff. Yeah,
because Constantine in particular feels a little neutered post introduction to the DC universe.
There's a lot of great storylines where like Batman consults Swamp Thing, and I kind of like that.
It's funny. Here's an anecdote that I will tell very vaguely. When Jason and I first met and we're talking about writing comics, Jason was like, "Well, this is how you pitch a comic." And pitched a Batman story with Swamp Thing in it. And I've always remembered that.
I don't remember that story.
I've retold this to you several times. I'll tell you off the mic because it's a good idea and you should write it someday.
I don't remember what this is, so
but
please.
I remember this and I'll always remember it. I think this is interesting because I think Scott Snyder, and maybe this is my unpopular hot take, I think Scott Snyder is at his best doing pure horror.
And this is pure horror.
As opposed to super heroics. I like him on American Vampire. I like his series Witches a lot. And so this seems to be more of the same. I also think it's interesting that he's kind of writing a Swamp Thing origin for this new continuity. And then he's later went on to do the same thing for Batman.
Yeah, sort of. Yeah.
So I just thought that was like an interesting tying together. I also remember I was working at a store when this trade came out, and I was like, "Rot World, what a crappy title! Like, you women hate the title of this book."
Oh, really?
So from an optics standpoint, I'm honestly shocked that like DC editorial or publicity.
The event's called Rot World.
I get it, and it is it's very evocative, but like it's a gross title, and it turns. I'm not saying that Swamp Thing has a huge female readership. I'm also not saying that women don't read Swamp Thing. But I remember women picking this book up and being like, that's disgusting.
Oh, really?
Yeah, like ladies were so turned off by this title. And so when you brought that up, like I just had like this flashing sense of memory of that. And when people do talk about Swamp Thing, the Alan Moore run and the Scott Snyder run are the two big ones that are sort of spoken of in the same breath. So I'm not shocked to find it on your list.
Huh?
All right. Are you ready?
Yes.
For the moment? The big moment. I can't do a drum roll, but I'm assuming that everybody listening to this in their cars and on subways and walking down the street are providing us with a drum roll right now. Professor Jason, what is your number one Swamp Thing story that I should read?
Alan Moore's back here.
I didn't like you were mean.
Of course, my Swamp Thing story is number one. Mm-hmm. Of course it is. It is a story that I penned when I made a deal with a goat god called... I gave him a plate of macaroni cheese, and he gave me the story. F off, kickers, listeners.
Whoa, Alan, get the hell out. Well, I don't like this. Alan is a mean guy.
He is mean.
He's supposedly retired from comics, even though he retired from comics 10 years ago.
Yeah.
Number one is an Alan Moore story. It's from the Alan Moore run. But to me, it perfectly sums up what you can do with Swamp Thing and kind of what a Swamp Thing story can be. It's called My Blue Heaven. It happens in Swamp Thing number 56. It's drawn by the famous artist and artist Rick Veitch.
Hey.
Or Veitch. I'm not sure how you pronounce it. I've never heard it said out loud. So by 1987, Saga of the Swamp Thing had been renamed just Swamp Thing.
Sure.
So that's part of that same series. And this is a big, weird storyline. Now, what this is that Alec Holland flings his consciousness, Swamp Thing, flings his consciousness across the universe to a brand new planet out in the middle of nowhere. And because this is a new power that Alan Moore gives to Swamp Thing, is the idea that Swamp Thing in the green is not just limited to Earth, it's limited to all vegetation in the universe. He's connected to all of it. So when he's the avatar of the green, he's not just the avatar of the green of Earth, he's the avatar of the green of the galaxy. So what he does is he has, let's just say that 55, Swamp Thing 55 was not a good issue, okay?
Okay.
So he decided to escape Earth, and he goes to this alien planet. And it's a planet filled with blue vegetation, hence the title, My Blue Heaven. So what Swamp Thing does is he decides to create stuff. So he creates new plants and he creates new trees, and they're all blue, and the issue is hauntingly blue. And this one, I kind of have to tell you what happens in the issue a little bit to like give it to you. So he creates new blue plants and blue things, and then he decides to create a blue version of his love, Abby Arcane. And he's happy for a bit and he's really excited. And then he creates a blue town, blue buildings, a blue church, a blue restaurant. And him and Abby live there happy as can be for, we don't know, like a good amount of time. And then eventually he starts seeing this blue antagonist, this character that's kind of following him around. It's some sort of man. He can't tell what it is. And he's like, did I create that? I don't know if I created that. And eventually him and Abby go to their fake restaurant with their fake servers in this fake blue world that was created by Swamp Thing. And the man confronts him, and it's John Constantine. So Swamp Thing's consciousness knew that this fake world was so wrong that his subconscious created a fake version of John Constantine.
That's really funny.
To kick him in the ass and be like, wake up, you poozer, or you poof. I don't know what would the British slang for that be. So the thing that I love about this storyline is that his Blue Valentine basically just proves that absolute power corrupts. And I think it's so haunting in art and powerful and metaphor. And this story is very much towards the end of Moore's run, but I think it's really, really good. And it's I think it really shows you the kind of like operatic and evocative stories that you can tell with a walking, talking pile of plants. And I'm not going to tell you the exact ending, but I'll just say that, like, let's just say that fake Constantine's confrontation with Swamp Thing sets Swamp Thing off.
Is this, and if you don't know, that's okay. Is this post Constantine and Abby hooking up?
I don't know. I don't remember.
That's okay. You didn't. I do not expect you to have read the entire Alan Moore run in preparation for this.
I think
it is.
I think it is because this is towards the end.
Yeah.
I think it is. But
because Swamp Thing also shows up in the very early issues of Hellblazer as well.
Yes. Yes.
They have this weird crossover.
Well, this is also post-Crisis, which Swamp Thing and Constantine both appear in.
Yes.
And as we know, Constantine is introduced in this run. Alan Moore creates John Constantine, and then that's how he gets spun off. No, the more interesting thing is that in this storyline, Swamp Thing thinks it's the real John Constantine, and then the John Constantine is like, only your dumb mind would create a version of me, you stupid plant, in a very John Constantine voice, which again, and that's the twist of the issue that makes it. This to me is peak Swamp Thing. It's this mystical godlike creature in a mystical godlike world, an alien planet. And to me, Swamp Thing stories, the good Swamp Thing stories, open your mind to possibilities. And the fact that Swamp Thing travels to an alien planet. And again, I fully admit it's very Dr. Manhattan on Mars.
Well, literally the same writer.
It's the same writer. This is after Watchmen. But the thing I appreciate is that whereas Dr. Manhattan talks about creating life, Swamp Thing actually does it.
I didn't expect there to be a blue planet.
Hey,
I didn't expect aliens.
Vertigo is out there. There's no aliens in this.
Well, an alien planet is alien.
Sure.
Alien by definition.
So that is my number one. This offhand, because again, it's a Vertigo. To me, Swamp Thing is a Vertigo character, and I want a weird, mind-expanding story to be the best Swamp Thing story. It's called My Blue Heaven. It's collected in all the Alan Moore. Yes. Ashley, I want to ask you a question real quick, because Constantine is in the story.
Yeah.
Do you think every great Swamp Thing story needs Constantine? Because I will say this, Constantine is in most of my picks.
Yes. I think those two characters should have a relationship.
Because, again, as we said, like Constantine is a Swamp Thing supporting character.
And I mean, I think if we were, and people can request us if they want, because we have done a Constantine lesson already, if we were to do like a top 5 Constantine stories.
Oh, interesting.
I think Swamp Thing would be in a good chunk of them as well.
I don't, actually, for me, just on the top of my head, I don't think so. Swamp Thing would pop up, but I think most of my stories would not include Swamp Thing.
Interesting. Well, maybe,
just because Hellblazer is so luminary to me. And
but he pops up in Hellblazer repeatedly.
But not a lot, actually. Not as it goes along. But he does quite a bit. In the beginning, he does.
After like Volume 5, after he goes back from hell, he shows up a lot less. But he, in the early days, like, there's the weird one where he's like living with the cult people who are going around to all the festivals, and Swamp Thing shows up for that. And yeah.
But you think Constantine needs to be there?
I do.
All right.
I think they are integral to each other.
All right. So that's my top 5. Ashley, here's the question. Same as the other one. Does any of these storylines make you intrigued to read some Swamp Thing?
Yes.
Do you think you will read Swamp Thing?
I've been meaning to read Swamp Thing for quite some time, so I think I will. I think I'll probably start with the Grant Morrison and Mark Miller stuff, though.
Oh, interesting. See, to be honest with you,
where do you think I should start?
And I would recommend this for every person that has never read Swamp Thing. You have 2 entry points. Your 2 entry points to me are The Anatomy Lesson by Alan Moore, which is if you buy any of the Alan Moore Saga of the Swamp Thing collections, they've been collected in, it's the first issue. Or I would suggest there is a hardcover collection. It's the Rot World storyline. I would recommend there's a book that says Swamp Thing by Scott Snyder and Yannick Paquette.
So you think those are the easiest?
Yes, and to me it depends on what do you want. Are you okay with reading older comics?
Yeah,
then go Alan Moore. If you find that you can't really read or you don't enjoy comics from the 80s, go Scott Snyder.
Do they feel very of the time? Because I think Hellblazer feels pretty modern.
No, it's the art.
Very. I've seen the art. It does feel throwback.
The art feels like the 80s.
Gorgeous, though.
It's great, but the stories are so good. Yes, they feel very modern. But the Scott Snyder run is Yannick Paquette, who's amazing,
gorgeous artist.
Who's really, really good. So to me, it would just be like, well, where do you want to go?
Okay.
The Scott Snyder story is more of a superhero story.
Yes. He's in the main DC.
The Alan Moore is more of a Vertigo story.
Yeah.
So what flavor do you want? I do think...
How mean do you want?
Well, that's true. Alan Moore is way meaner,
yeah.
and it's way out there. You probably never expected Swamp Thing to travel to an alien blue planet.
No, I was making suspicious eyes when Jason was explaining that.
Scott Snyder's is all about, hey, there's a villain. We're going to fight him.
Yeah.
What do you want? I think you should read both.
Okay.
But if you think one of those if you think the Scott Snyder will give you a better appreciation of the Alan Moore, then read that first.
I will admit I'm mildly skeptical of the Scott Snyder run just because he tends to like to have characters talk a lot.
He does.
And I don't think Swamp Thing should be verbose.
No, and Swamp Thing is very verbose.
I like the idea that it's hard for him to talk, so he uses his words sparingly.
Mm-hmm. Modern Swamp Thing talks a lot. Mm-hmm. So there you go. Okay, so I guess the answer is yes.
Yes.
Okay, so you can find, I would say, the top 3 of these in our recommended reading. Ashley, where would they find all those?
They would find that at geekhistorylesson.com/recommended reading. There's great widgets. You pick the one that you want, you go purchase it, and at no extra cost to you, a little support comes back to your Mind University. It'll actually probably be the top 4 because 3 and 1 will be encapsulated in the Alan Moore collection.
Oh, that is correct. So yeah, it should be the Grant Morrison, Mark Miller, the Scott Snyder, and then the Alan Moore run. Yeah, that's correct. All right, cool. So now we're going to go into the last section of this podcast, the honor roll.
Yes, which is where if you are very kind and you reach out through the green, as you are an avatar of it, you go to Apple Podcasts, you leave us 5 stars, we'll read whatever you write because your support of us and your writing a review helps other cool potential students find this podcast, and we appreciate that.
Our first review comes from Noel Tate, who said, got introduced to Jason and Ashley from the fantastic people over at Comic Pop. Oh, Sal, love Sal. And have enjoyed this podcast immensely since. If I could, I would give it 6 stars. I would, even if they did an episode on Moon Knight. Cheers, guys. Moon Knight's a big requested one, but I think we're waiting to see what they're going to do with him in the Marvel Cinematic Universe.
We know Moonlight. We're going to talk more about the Barry Jenkins Oscar-winning epic, Moonlight. We know Moon Knight is poised for something we've all known for some time, and so we're waiting for the opportune moment to strike. So know that you're welcome to keep requesting Moon Knight, but we do know that people want Moon Knight.
That's right. The next one comes from Blue Feather 42, who said, I decided at the beginning of the year I wanted to get into comics, but that was more confusing than I anticipated. Exactly. For someone whose only prior knowledge of superheroes was from movies and a few cartoons, I had no idea what I was doing. But after listening to a bunch of these podcasts, I feel like not only have I gained an understanding of many popular characters and keystone events, but the history and structure of comics as well. The recommended reading has been especially helpful in pointing me towards great jumping off points, and I'll be listening as long as you guys keep going. Oh, thank you, Blue Feather.
Thank you, and welcome to the ranks of comic book readers.
So thank you, Noel Tate and Blue Feather 42. Inside the refrigerator in the Mind University Teachers Lounge, there is string cheese that is always there by Jeff.
Who's Jeff? What does he do?
Jeff is the bus driver.
Oh, lovely.
Yes. You do not want to irritate him.
Does he wear a bus driver wig? That's a joke for 2% of the listening community.
I have no idea what that means, so I'm going to say no.
Oh, bummer.
Ashley,
yes.
Where can they leave us iTunes reviews and all kinds of stuff like that if they want to be featured on the podcast?
If you want to be featured on the podcast, you can leave your reviews at Apple Podcasts or wherever fine podcasts are found, but mostly on Apple Podcasts. That's where we'll grab them from. You can send us a request or a comment or a concern at geekhistorylesson.com, facebook.com/geekhistorylesson, or on Twitter at GHL Podcast. There's a bunch of ways to contact us in all of those places.
And don't forget to check out our Patreon, patreon.com/Jawiin. That's Jawiin. Over there, every single week, we do an extra podcast called Geek History Lesson Extra. So if you like Geek History Lesson, we expand on the topic we were talking about. This week, I don't really know what we're going to be talking about. We're going to be talking about Swamp Thing in live action, Swamp Thing character dissection. I have no idea. It's going to be a big thing on Swamp Thing. But
cool.
An extra podcast every single week. And every monthly perk you give us helps keep the Mind University alive. So we thank you to all the patrons over there who keep this podcast alive so much over there. You can follow me on Twitter at Jawiin, Jawiin. Follow Ashley on Twitter at Ashley V. Robinson. And don't forget to pick up my book, Super Soldiers. It's on Amazon, Barnes & Noble right now. And if you've read it already, you enjoy it, thank you so much. I hope you dug it. go leave me a review on Amazon because that makes a big difference.
Please.
All right, hashtag stick around, the part where we ask you to stick around through all the plugs. Ashley, should Swamp Thing be in the CW shows? Let's talk about this.
In the CW shows?
Yeah.
No.
You got to expand more than no.
Absolutely.
Look, I almost talked for 45 minutes about Swamp Thing. Now it's your turn.
I think Swamp Thing should have a mature adaptation.
Okay.
And I don't think the CW, in my opinion, the CW has not proven that it can deliver that. Networks have...
Some people might argue, again, we haven't seen it, that the DC Universe show might be that.
Sure, I haven't seen it, but you asked me about the CW.
Sure.
I actually think streaming is probably the ideal place for it. I think streaming is probably the ideal place for a Constantine show. And I like Constantine on Legends, so I'm not saying that I couldn't be proven wrong. Having not seen the DC Universe show, I think Swamp Thing is at its best when it's a little scary and a little weird and a little out there. And I don't know if the way networks currently work, I don't know if that's the best environment for him. Do you think?
Yes, 100%.
Okay.
Well, because I
mean, I know Arrow's dark, but it's not the same.
I'm of the opinion that, I don't think he should have a CW show. And again, I have not seen the DC Universe show. But I think he should appear once or twice. He's the character in those type of stories and superhero stories where you're just oh, we need this bit of information. Let's go talk to Swamp Thing.
Batman uses him like that.
So to me, I'm surprised we haven't seen him on Legends.
Yeah.
Especially Constantine there.
Well, I was going to say Legends has absorbed people from other shows in the past. So there's nothing to say that Swamp Thing may not. There's nothing to say that Swamp Thing may not appear in Crisis on Infinite Earths.
That's true. I hope he does.
That's something that we'll probably chat and make more predictions about on Crisis Club, which you can also get over on the Patreon.
Yep.
But yeah, I don't think the CW is the ideal home for a successful Swamp Thing show.
Well, that's what I'm saying. I'm just saying, should he appear? I agree. He should not have a show.
Should he appear? Yeah. Should he have his own flagship show? I don't think so. Also, and I think DC Universe ran into it, I think Swamp Thing is an expensive undertaking.
Your character is a walking special effect.
So perhaps television is not the ideal way, live action television is not the ideal way to do. I think you could make a
badass cartoon.
Amazing, in the style of the Spawn cartoon. I think you could make an amazing animated Swamp Thing that's more mature. I also think there's a great Swamp Thing movie out there. I really do.
Maybe. Yeah, maybe. The other ones have not been great, but I think there's somebody could write it.
Yeah.
Somebody write it. All right, cool. That's it for this lesson. I am Jason. Please don't use pesticides, Inman.
I am Ashley Victoria Robinson, and Professor Jason, would you please dismiss the class?
The green says goodbye.